And we are live. This week's episode, power. All about power. Eric's favorite word.
Damn right.
Power. All right, but before we dive into it, I do have one little tidbit of news. It comes from a recent study that was published in the Journal of Applied Physiology. And I just want to read the kind of the abstract, because that's really enough to say. A recent study found that lifelong exercisers that averaged 75 years of age had cardiovascular health markers typical of someone in their early 40s and muscular health markers of a 25-year-old. So the key was to exercise regularly year after year.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I think it just is a great study in how they chose to pick athletic people or exercisers who have been exercising their whole life, who are in their old age, who are doing it. You know, so many publications talk about longevity or aging gracefully, and quite frankly, you know, I'll throw myself under the bus. It's a lot of people who are younger, who are scoping through the data and, you know, training clients. But it's great to see the evidence from the people who are doing it. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah. I think it's important.
Totally. Well, it's huge across the whole board. And I was just reading, I think it was last week. It said physical activity in preschool affect your future heart. And honestly, we kind of know, but they're saying now that kids young should be out moving around, playing, running, because it's going to affect them when they're older. That we really shouldn't wait till this ripe age of puberty or like teenagers. Like, no, the kids have to be out and moving around. Now, that doesn't mean they need to be on a weight training program. They can work out if it's supervised, but just get them to play, and it's going to have an impact on cardiovascular health later in life. The sooner you start, the better you're off going to be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of critical periods for development, especially in those younger ages, like, you know, 4 to 12. There's a lot of critical periods for development. I know, especially in type 2 explosive fiber that helps with power. If you were had a very sedentary childhood, you probably are lacking some speed, agility, some power. You're probably not the highest jumper in your group of friends, but for the most part, the people who are jumping around as kids, up on their toes all the time, bouncing around, they have more type 2 muscle production in their legs, and thus more power.
And that's what makes every kid different, athlete wise and performance wise.
Yeah, I think that's why
different.
That's
I
actually
can jump.
Yeah, yeah. But you know what? That's why the best athletes are the multi-sport athletes, because they're doing not only they're probably doing a sport every single season, keeping them active and developing, but also they get so much variable movement in.
Well, that's the thing, is that multiple disciplines of all kinds of movement goes way far beyond anything that just, I mean, you can still get successful at one sport. It's been done. But to really have a vast majority of stimulus from all different sports, it's a lot better in the long run.
Well, those are usually like the elite athletes. Like if you think about, I don't know, like one of the first ones that comes to mind is Terry Long. And he was just like an all-around beast. Yeah, American football. Where is this guy?
And for him, back in his day, you know, there was weight training. It was just coming into the scope of what is now like strength and conditioning. I mean, a lot of those guys were playing other sports just to stay in shape for their main sport. But most people back then, if you look at these greats, I mean, they were, you know, 3-star athletes in college. I mean, all Scholastic. I mean, these guys were great.
Yeah, it's just I guess honestly what happens is people lose sight of what work their body could be benefiting from with all these different technological advances or just modern advances in general. Like, like the scooters, the electric scooters are tons of fun, but as a kid, we'd have to run everywhere and walk everywhere. And quite frankly, we ran everywhere because our emotion said we wanted to get there as quick as we could. And we didn't care how tired we were. But, it just forced us to get exhausted, to get tired, to be out running around. And, I see lots of kids play with the scooters, which is great. I think it's a lot of fun. Good activity outside. You're getting vitamin D in. But, just not as much physical demanding activity, even for recreation, that you see anymore. So I think people just kind of, it gets out of sight, out of mind. And you got to remember, especially for your kids, just like make sure you got them enrolled in some type of activity outside, work with them and find something that they are passionate about, that they enjoy. And yeah, get them moving. It's going to help their overall health as they get older, their cardiorespiratory system, their heart, everything.
You can never stop training it. You can never. Always got to be. And with the different disciplines, this is where you're coming back with. I mean, one of my probably favorite words in this industry that you could say is type 2. And we're not talking type 2 diabetes. We're talking type 2 muscle fibers.
Oh my God. Sorry.
Type 2.
I have such corny humor that I was thinking of like a stand-up comedy joke with that as the punchline. That'd be so bad. But yeah, type 2 muscle fiber.
That's where I'd say a lot of kids who are listening, or parents are listening to this, that they want to get faster, they want to be better jumpers, sprinters. That's the aspects you want to develop right there. These type 2 muscle fibers, which if you are inactive, you're not going to train them and recruit them enough. You're going to kind of live in this low threshold type 1 muscle fibers, which is your aerobic capacity. You'll be good at longer distance stuff. Or if you do nothing, you're probably not going to develop much of any kind of muscle fiber, and they're not going to transition. And they'll kind of wait till the stimulus to come, and you really won't be good at anything.
And as we age, the type 2 fibers are the first to atrophy and the first that we lose. So I say the best thing to do as you age is power, plyometrics, and explosive work. And all that stuff is going to help maintain the type 2 muscle mass on your body, which in turn will keep you having a healthy metabolism and help you overall.
Plus for type 2, they're more adaptable muscle fibers, so you're going to get more out of them. And for training wise, it doesn't matter if athlete or client, to have them understand that, okay, these fibers, if we can really tap into them, these are where a lot of growth potential can happen and change can happen, whether it be more power driven, metabolic driven, size driven. This is what you want to target. Everyone and anyone can kind of do this steady state, low intense work is where you're working your type 1 fibers, but you want to change your type 2. That's where you want to get the biggest transition.
And what's funny is, now that you're saying type 1 fibers, powerlifting. As a sport, powerlifting is not about power. Olympic lifting is more about power production.
I love that, because everyone's like, oh, you want to develop power? It's like powerlifting. No.
It's not. It's so weird though. It's like, why did we name it that? It's the same thing with like football and soccer. It's just it's so confusing.
And with that, I guess you could kind of say, hey, it umbrellas under this whole definition of power, which is to move or travel with great speed or force. So they are moving. Right?
Do we have Neil deGrasse Tyson here today?
But when people think force, they're thinking, okay, force as in I'm pushing force against this. But in the power realm, what we're talking about is force, which go back to physics back in high school or biomechanics, is mass times acceleration. Yeah, there's some component there, But to really get good power development, what you're going to see on field or in a weight room, we're not looking at moving maximal amount of weight.
Right. And one thing that that I think I want to mention real quick is just how that force number is kind of depicted upon speed, in terms of weight training, force is going to be how quickly you can move something over a distance. So in that range of motion of an exercise, your force production through that exercise is going to change variably based upon where you can generate the most amount, or where you can move as fast through the distance as possible. So distance over time. So let's actually start though. Let's start with the physics side of it. I think it is an important foundation before we get right into the gym setting of it. Plus, I know that Menchie's going to have a lot to say about power production because he worked with Northeastern's strength and conditioning department. So I'm probably going to be just sitting here like a fly on the wall. So let me just get my talking out of the way first before he goes on to a power rant, which I love, by the way, personally. But so power is work over time. Essentially, how much energy is converted from, say, one type of energy to another, or vice versa. So, like from kinetic energy to potential energy, or potential energy to kinetic energy. We break that down further. So, we're if you're following along, we're at power is work over time. If we break that down further, we're at power is force times distance over time, because work is force times distance. And then if the force is being applied at an angle, it would be cosine of theta, whatever that angle is that the force is being applied at. But that's a whole nother lecture. So power equals force times distance over time. We break that down further because we know that distance over time is velocity. So now we're at power equals force times velocity. So if we look at that one a little bit further, we're at P equals FV, and F is force equals mass times acceleration. Acceleration is the way that our velocity changes over time. So innately, in power equals force times velocity, which is the same thing as work over time that we just talked about, the side that plays the bigger role in power production,
that was one of the
speed,
the coolest
and velocity
equipment
and
pieces we had was the Tendo machines,
your velocity
which
over time.
If anyone's listening, there's a couple.
So if you're still with me,
devices that measure speed. I think one is the push band, the Tendo.
That is
they are pretty pricey.
Weight training,
but the cool thing is you could see how much force or power in watts that person was giving out through the bar. So this device would attach to the bar. It'd have a strong Teflon wire, and you would move that thing, and it would calculate all this work. It would also calculate how fast you were moving. So we're talking meters per second. If you were under 1, that means you're moving slow. So we had to get you moving faster. A lot of it was about how quick can you move a certain amount of weight to get better to transition to what your sport is. So if you're a high jumper, you are working lower percentages of your max, but you're also going to be working at a faster speed. So with power, there's always a big argument of, well, you have to train strength, max strength only to develop power. You will develop power if you do that, but you won't develop optimal power. So optimal power we're looking at is 1.0 put a 1.5 meters per second. And that's pretty fast coming off a hang clean, a squat, or any kind of explosive movement that we would test. So we'd have this set up. And there'd be certain phases, we're not training power every day all the time. Different aspects of it. When certain athletes are coming towards a peaking part or nearing a competition, that's when we want to really peak them for max power. So a week or two prior to competition, we drop down anywhere from 25 to 50% of their max and let them hit that thing hard and just develop maximal force they can through resistance that's not too heavy that's going to slow them down.
Mm.
So no, it's actually just a pad with it's almost like the rowing machine, you pull the cable out.
And
It looks
the
it's just like
Tendo.
that, and you just
I can't
velcro it
picture
to
it. I
the
need to
bar.
Google it,
So
but
you
it
can
looks like a
velcro it to a
squat rack,
bar,
right?
a dumbbell. You can basically velcro it to anything, and it will measure that. Now there's which is great. They are pretty pricey,
Yeah.
but I mean, at that top level, a push band. The other one is a push band that a lot of people use. It is pretty accurate. There's a whole app on.
That's
I
pretty
think it's
interesting.
the Android and Apple. Actually, maybe just Apple.
And
That's
what was
another
the
good
other
way
one
to
called?
really
It was
measure
called a push band.
power output. It can go around bar or it can go around your arm.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, which is cool. In training power, basically what we're looking
And you
for
wrap
is
it around the
explosive
bar.
strength, which is the ability to increase force or torque as quickly as possible over a
Interesting. Yeah, I
distance
see a lot
during
of
a
people doing it on
period
their arm.
of basically muscle contraction and relaxation. So yeah, so you got to have both because if you try to train
So we still
power,
would want, like, before
I should reverse
anyone
that.
would
You want to train
want to work on
strength
power, they would still
more
want
for
to
because
do
we know
like a
movement's broken into
3 to 4 weeks of
isometric,
just focusing on
eccentric,
strength.
concentric movement. If we don't right, if you try to train that explosively, you're not going to have the strength for when you need the ability to rapidly shift from one to the other.
Right. Right. That's like upward phase, downward phase, and
And
middle of
this
the
where that's
phase.
where it's very vital where people are like, oh, I want to increase power only, and they're doing very light stuff, plyometrics, ballistics, which is great, but there's going to be a point where they're not going to
Gotcha.
be able to recruit the number of muscle fibers that they
What does the
need to get maximal power, maximal force through the ground. Because remember, training power and acceleration and everything else, you need to have total recruitment of all muscle fiber types, one and two. If you don't train enough and have them developed on their threshold and they're not activating, then you're not going to
right?
get maximal power. Right.
Gotcha.
And they say
Yeah,
in
and
many books and
working
research
through
have shown
strength
that
before you
development
try
of
to get
power
maximal power will
may
allow
be
you to
one of the
get
most
all
important
proper
physiological
activation of those
adaptations
fibers,
for
as well
athletic
as
performance.
strengthen
So
your ligaments and
we're not
tendons,
just
so
here
that
talking about
when
power.
you go to be
It's very
explosive, you
important
don't
if
tear
you're
something.
on the athletic side of life to develop this aspect of training because this is how you're going to get better on the court, field, ice, wherever. Right.
Well, athlete or not, athlete or not, it's the best way to train. Athlete or not, that actually is going to improve your longevity by improving your lean body mass, and it's also the last or the first fiber to start to atrophy. So again, you want to maintain that type 2 fiber as you age, because that's what's going to help keep you healthy and keep you moving well and keep you strong from injuries such as tripping or falling, leading to a break, and now you're in the hospital, such as things like that. So, I think regardless of whether you're an athlete or not, power all the way. Now, kind of to your point though, it doesn't have to be trained every single day. If you're an athlete, yeah, there's different ways that you want to train power for peak performance, deceleration, stuff like that. But for your general population, yeah, I think I agree that we shouldn't necessarily say that you have to focus on
Oh,
power to
absolutely.
live a healthy life,
And
but
just like you said,
you
there's
want
so
to
many
incorporate some
ways that you
type
can
of
take
biometric,
exercise
some
and make
type of
it a power
jump
movement. It's
or
not just this one
slam
aspect that
or
most
chop or
people
lift
can't
that,
do.
that
Now,
is
with
more
the general
explosive,
population, if you're
more
lifting, if you're
power.
big,
You
not
know,
big into Olympic lifting, that's fine. You can still develop power, the same amount of power without Olympic lifting. Obviously, that's been over time one of the biggest
like a yeah.
aspects of strength and conditioning programs is some sort of Olympic movement, hang clean, snatch, power clean, power pull. It develops that. But if you're a general population person or have a client, they don't need to be doing that stuff. You can get it complete elsewhere on it. And it's also very good for neuromuscular function. I mean, we're talking with muscle fibers, we're creating and toning and using up more of those neuromuscular junctions and having that ability to send that neural pathway up and back the system and not just live in one realm. So it's got to be implemented throughout programs. I mean, it's not going to be blocked if you're not an athlete. You're not going to be working on just pure power phases. You can work it in daily. There are also a lot of good programs out there, or I should say more the very basic. I would start with some plyometrics, some explosive movements,
How
some
would you
loading,
incorporate
and then
power
change the
into
direction
someone's
quick,
program if
exploding.
they've already gone through a
And
strength series, they have good range of motion? Where would you start them for power?
no, I would start less. I would start even line hops. So you have a line on the floor, or if you have a turf field, you take one of the lines and you start double feet back
So
and
you wouldn't
forth.
necessarily start with like
Because
a
now you're
box
just
jump or a
teaching,
broad
okay,
jump or a
rate
depth
force
jump.
production. How much
You
force
would
can
want
they
to do
produce in that amount of time? And you're not really putting them up to a high task where they motor might not be ready for a box jump, a depth jump, or a broad jump. No, so the big thing
right for
with, and
power
this is where a
form and
lot
stuff
of
like that.
times
Well, what
power
about
gets
on the
a
line
bad
jumps
rap, or
part?
people
How
are
are you
like, oh, this
measuring
is
that? Is that
dangerous, is because a lot
by
of
time and
times
seeing
what,
like
I'm not singling
anecdotally,
just
just
CrossFit out,
whether they
but a lot of
exhaust
times what
themselves
CrossFit
in
and
30
these
seconds or something?
crazy intense workout regimens will do, at the end they'll be like, all right, I need you to do 50 box jumps with squats paired with it for conditioning. That then you're adding a high central nervous system activity onto conditioning, which is not optimal, not really safe, especially if you have a new person. So starting off, if you're basically getting into plyometrics, if you're a beginner, we're talking total in a workout, probably 80 to 100 foot taps or foot contacts to the ground. That's very basic to bring them into. Right.
So you're when you said see how much force they can produce in that setting, You're
Yeah,
just
see, I
trying to
don't, I
see
wouldn't be like, all right, we're gonna do line
can
jumps,
you
80 hops. I think
can you
by
no,
that
excuse me,
time
can
you're
you
gonna be
maintain
pretty
producing that much
gassed. I
force
might
80
do
to
10 to
100
20
times?
second line hop,
And
have
and
them
then what would you do?
do
You might time them and
a
then
med ball slam,
revisit
which
it
is
again,
more
see how long it
power,
takes them to get
and
80 to
then back
100
to the line
taps.
hops, 3 sets. So they might get in the 20 seconds if they're really quick. Let's average. Let's say about 30 reps. So if I have them do it 3 times, they're probably in that range. If they're kind of fatiguing and slowing down, that might be where I'm saying, hey, I got to kind of bring that back. And then intermediate's like 100 to 120. And then once you're, yep.
Okay. Now, what if, okay, so I guess this is more the question I'm asking. Say that I just did a line drill back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
I mean, it's going to be pretty
When
quick.
do
The,
I
the good
know
thing with
that
something like
I've
line
used the
hops
line
or
drill
side to side is you can
efficiently
add
enough
aspects and
that
change
my skills are
pretty quick
proficient
and the body
enough
will
that
adapt
I
to it
can
because it's not
now
a
move
crazy
on
stimulus.
to,
It's not like
say,
I'm
the
putting
next progression?
150 pounds on your back saying, all right, I need you to do this 80 times. You might do forward back line hops for 20 seconds, 2 sets, and then I'm going to go, hey, we're going to go side to side, 20 seconds, and then we're going to go 1 foot each side. Call it a day. Next training session, you can add a different aspect of plyometrics in. It could be, hey, we're going to go maybe more of a squat, jump, land position and have you absorb that force so you know what it feels like to land the mechanics. If you're starting off, it's all about teaching mechanics, feet under and landing position. That's why it's so important to have a base of strength underneath that because you can't just have people just going into box jumps and depth jumps if they don't know how to lower a load into a squat position and be able to control it. Correct.
Stabilize. Yeah, right. Right. Because now they're just actually relying on their joints to take that tension rather
Yeah,
than any
start
musculature.
slow and build up.
Okay, so
Basically, your
I like it.
base
I'm basically just trying to
movement is
listen.
going to be a
Actually,
squat jump,
basically just trying to
body weight
give
squat jump.
information to anyone who's
We're driving
listening
up, you're
who
landing,
maybe
good
doesn't know
athletic
where to start
stances. We're landing,
with
absorbing the
plyometrics.
impact. That's your
But
base one. You want to
uh,
practice.
you can do some push ups, like pulsing, trying to get your hands to leave the ground. Obviously people do clap push ups, but you can progress to that. You can take a bar and make sure it's stabilized on the rack at a low level, like at about knee height, and come underneath it and do an underhand inverted row or an overhand inverted row and try to pulse your grip so you're really explosive and pull yourself up so you have that quarter of a second where you let go of the bar. And then you can progress up to a pull up and do like a plyometric pull up. And you can do, power production in your pull up, power production in your push up, and power production in your squat. And you can get some glute ham drive and do like a broad jump. Um, what's another good
Those are
one
probably
that we
one of
could
my favorite
they throw
ones.
out
The
there
high knees. I
for
mean,
general athletes?
frontal plane
An ice
exercise, single
skater or
leg, getting
hide in where you go
explosive.
from one
It
leg
works
to
for
the other, and
multiple sports.
you're either going forward and to the side, or you're just going straight to, or just going, excuse me, just right to the side, or left to the side. But footwear. I actually just started doing them on the stairs. Like, so you're going up and over and forward. You know what I mean? So I go like every 3 stairs, and I do like a hide-in over to the right foot, then a hide-in up to the left foot, climb the stairs like that. Um, yeah, I guess I just want to give some examples for people on some power exercises, and you know,
Oof.
it's really funny when you even take
We're
someone and
talking
do
going
like
from
10
a
push-ups
high,
and then have them
or
roll
say
over and throw a
higher
medicine
resistant
ball up at you,
exercise
how
into a
quickly their
plyometric
body
explosive movement.
fatigues going from
Oh man,
strength to power like
you know
that.
this is one of my
And I
favorite
know there's
words,
a
right?
special term for that. Would you like to
I
dive
know.
into that a little bit?
So what Matt is talking about is the post activation potentiation. It is probably the bread and butter for power development in the strength and conditioning world. Basically, you're
Dude, I tossed it up to you.
oh yeah,
AKA what
is it?
every athletic
And
department is
and a lot of
using
people
with
always
their
ask me, "Oh,
athletes.
well, how
What
does it work?"
every
So here
soccer player,
we're gonna
football
dive in.
player, basketball
So
player, hockey
back
player,
to our type 2
UFC
muscle
fighter,
fibers. They have greater capacity
you
for
name it.
calcium
This
release than
is
type 1 fibers,
the
which makes them have
the bread
faster
and butter of it all.
contractions. So when you load a heavy movement, so sort of high intervals, it's gonna your muscles are gonna release that calcium, and that's gonna release at a greater rate because it needs turnover. So then when you drop it, take the weight off, and you're gonna do this explosive
Okay.
movement, you're
Okay.
gonna increase the sensitivity of the actomyosin complex for the calcium, and it's gonna get more type 2 attachment, rate force development, and then you get more pulling through the muscles where you get a higher explosive power movement. Do it.
So because I'm gonna just translate that a little
Yeah, so
bit
the
here. I'm trying
calcium,
to.
as we contract the muscle, it releases
Because you
calcium,
do something with
and the
such
calcium
a high
floods
resistance,
the
you
cell
get
in order
more
to turn over
calcium
actin-myosin, ATP.
use or production in what is it? Creating ATP?
Correct. And then,
Okay. Okay. So it's like you're like priming your muscle to be explosive. And then you go from that strength exercise into the explosive exercise, and
yeah, the
not
calcium's
only are
already there.
you
It's like,
correct me
boom,
if I'm wrong, but not
let's
only
keep it,
are
let's
you
go.
recruiting
You get these fibers
all
to
that
react a
muscle
little bit
fiber you just
differently, saying,
used,
hey, we
but now
can still
because of the
produce more
calcium
force.
priming the
And that's,
cells, you've added more bang into
oh,
your
yeah.
into your into your whatever you're doing.
And I love training that aspect of lifting and power development, especially for or any athlete, but young athletes can see a very
So
good
it acts as a fiber, or I mean,
translation
it acts
over
as a primer. It
of
literally is a
power
primer.
production.
Yeah.
And
All
it
right. That's what's up. So we talked about training for power being general pop. Now we're talking about generating power being more of a general athlete or an athlete. Um, Strength into power is what we're talking about now, and what is my what am I looking at here in as far as do I need to do the strength exercise right before I do the power exercise? do I need to do the strength
So if you're doing
exercise,
it, it's a
20
very
minutes before I do the
short
power
time
exercise? Do I
frame
do the
window
strength
that you're working
exercises
with.
on Monday and the power
So you
exercise
do
on
your
Tuesday?
exercise,
What
and
definition of
some research said within
post-activation
2 minutes,
potentiation, this
you're out
PAPS,
of the window
is
of
going to
that post
be the
activation
most beneficial
potentiation. So
to
you need to
this
do it if you're squatting.
force
You
production,
need
this
to do
power
it
production.
right after you squat. So you squat heavy, 2 reps. You have to hit a box jump or a broad jump. You have to do something right afterwards to get that effect. Because with that, after those, and it might be a little less. After 60 seconds, that calcium's starting to go out of the muscle cell. It's starting to go back. You're not going to be able to use that again until you activate the muscles again or use them. So it's got to be like a 1-2, and it's also called French contrast training. A lot of coaches use it. You can do a squat to a box jump to a broad jump to
Deteriorate.
a Haydn. You can add them on to develop that. Now with that,
Yeah. Yeah, my favorites are a squat to a box jump because a lot of your power is driving your force up, and then a deadlift to a broad jump because a lot of the power is driving your body forward. Same thing with the broad jump, driving forward. I also Pat Davidson. You go from a fucking squat to a max out box jump to a weighted box jump to a broad jump.
right?
I
But it
mean, you're just
is a
talking
good
about
one, and
so
you're
much
not
priming and
on this
tricking the
one.
central nervous
We're not
system to
training
just recruit as
capacity,
much
so
power
you're not repping out
and
10 to 15
manifest
high
as
rep
much
volume.
changes from
Everything's
the
staying
work as
low.
possible.
I do want to
But
get
that's
to
getting into like
when we
mad
can
scientist
use
type of
higher
stuff. We don't need to
volume
go that deep.
for training, but I think we'll get to that in a second. We'll finish up this post activation potentiation and training effect, and what kind of rep range we can use for power, and what we're looking at for
Okay.
what weights to use percentage wise, and that's a big thing because power we're probably going to stay between 1 and maybe 5 reps at the max. I mean, you can go a little bit more, but if you want to train true power, it's going to be stretch shortening, get explosive, and shut it down.
So let's switch gears and talk a little bit
So every
about.
day
We'll
you
get
can
into the
train a
volume side of it, but let's switch
different
gears and talk a
modality,
little bit
just like
about.
your strength training.
There
You can
was one
have
part where you brought up about
one day
how
be, and this
you can
you
train
can
power
break it
every
up
day. You just
into
train
anything.
different
You can have
aspects of it.
a
Let's talk about that a
lateral
little
power
bit and the
day.
different
You can have
aspects
a
of
linear
power that you
power
might
day. You can
train.
have a vertical power day. You can have a upper body power day or low body power day. But on the lines of that is power is very taxing to our central nervous system. So you're not doing high volume of this every single day. You're in a phase where it's high intensity but lower volume, and then you might be doing some assistant work. So
Yeah.
in a program for development, the end goal is peak power. Like you want to have the most peak power you can. So say if you're looking long term, is
Are
you're
you
going to
always
produce
training
peak power
peak
to dunk
power?
a basketball or do a high jump or jump to the ground or cut
Yeah.
on the football field. That's the end goal of training.
Okay.
But there's always different intensities you can
Okay.
work through at power. A lot of books will say about 30% of your max is the best and the greatest way to produce power and have that force, which is not a lot of weight. Think 30% of your squat max is not is lightweight, but you can move that really fast and produce more power. So in power phases, you're using about 25 to 50% of your 1 rep maxes. So you're not going to get the fatigue and the demand you are of doing like a 3x10 or a 3x5 or 5x5 on a squat. You might do a 5x3 in a squat, but that all that is going to explosive strength, but you're still good to go do other stuff. And other aspects of training with that, it doesn't always have to be weight. You can do rotational slams, you can do med ball stomps, you can do plyometric push-ups.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
so many ways you can add power into exercise. Like you said, chops. You can make explosive chops, lighter weight, produce that force, get a good velocity.
But like you said, it's going to be so taxing on the central nervous system that if you're doing something for power as your main working set, that if you're trying to superset with that with
Yeah,
something that is
and for power,
also
you want
peak
quality
power,
reps. So
you want to keep
you're not looking at,
your reps
we're
low,
not
or
hitting
else you're going to
high number
fatigue
of reps.
early,
Where
and now you're
reps
not
we're
going to
probably
have
at
good
anywhere from
power out of
12
your
to 15
main
quality
exercise,
reps,
and
and that's your
your
power training
secondary
day.
work's going to pull from your primary work. Right. I love it. I love it. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about volume. How you might progress
It
an
it all
athlete
depends on
to
and seasons.
maybe
If
an
you're a
off
person
season
who needs
athlete
to
to an
have
in
a lot
season
of power,
athlete.
you're going to
How
be
often
training
you
it more
train power
often.
in the off
It's
season, and how often you train
sometimes kind
power
of silly to
in
see these
season.
programs that need a lot of power try to develop them in 1 or 2 months. So this is something that you should always be focused on and working towards. So you have your general GPP program, and then you're going to start getting into aspects of, hey, you can work strength, speed strength, absolute strength, all that stuff. So it's a continuum on a force curve. Is the more first force you have is you're going to have your absolute strength. You're going to move slow. Then you have your max strength, accelerated strength, and strength, speed strength, and starting strength. With which now you get higher velocities. So as you go through a season, if your sport is running, you want to start training more on the higher velocity side of that, and that's a very linear one. You can go absolute all the way down to speed strength and very explosive movements. If you're doing it more concurrent and you want to kind of jump around here and there, that's absolutely fine. But I think at some point during, especially young athletes, they have to be training power almost consistently through a whole macro cycle. So get them used to box jumps and then progress them to depth jumps. And then you can progress them to depth jumps to box jumps, all that stuff. It's always a big progression, but I don't think you're ever not training it. You're training people to, if they're at 80% of their max, hey, you got to move this weight quick, controlled, fire up out of that. You're still training the aspect of the neurological system to, hey, I got to move fast. And I'm sure you've heard, coach, this is a big coaching thing. Oh, if you were to move a lot of weight slow, you're going to be slow. I mean, it's such an old school saying, which kind of has some. You ever heard like a coach say, "Oh, if you want to move slow, you're gonna train slow. If you want to be fast, you got to train fast." You ever heard that? I've heard it a lot.
Wait, say that one more.
It's one where it's like, yeah, it's true. If you just train slow and you be powerlifting movements, I mean, you take a powerlifter, they're not going to be crushing it on a lacrosse field. It's not
I have.
happening.
I mean, I've heard people say
So
that.
that's where you have to have this. Oh,
No, no. They might get a little bit of strength, but overall they're going to plateau, and it's going to be a hard plateau because they're not going to be able to increase weights because they're not getting any speed, or they're not moving anything with enough velocity to make up for the added weight. So yeah, it's like it's like trying to throw something as far as you can, and you think that you need to
There's always going to be an
improve
aspect
how far
of
your arm
power being
reaches
trained
forward. You need to
throughout
lengthen that distance.
a
And in reality, you're actually going to
right.
throw it further if you improve the way you pull it back and you have a pristine back throw, so to speak, or backswing.
Right. In season, you might dial the power down a little bit
Through any
because
athlete, right? They should be training power
right,
in some
you're also
aspect,
getting
in
a lot
some
of
way.
volume through
Otherwise, if they're
reps
not training
during
power,
practice
they're
and
probably just going to
games.
be
So you bring
asses.
that
They're
down a
going
little
to slow
bit.
themselves down. Like,
You
there's
can
no
also
reason
do,
they should
hey,
be training
if they're
hypertrophy.
getting a lot of volume through practice and games, you say, hey, I'm going to take 30% of their
Maintain
max and I'm going to
peak
have them go
performance, right?
move that for 3 reps really quick, do another assistant exercise, and have them do 3 to 4 sets of that and do some other stuff and then have them call it a day. That's fine because you're going to preserve that power aspect. Just like in season, you're not coming in and going to be doing 3 sets of 15 hypertrophy because that's just going to make them too sore. Off season, it's what you got to develop. You have to have it. I mean, power. If you want athletic ability, you have to train it, and you have to train it often. I've got caught even myself where you kind of push it off and wait till maybe a last phase or block, and you still develop it. But I don't think you leave some on the table where you're like, I could have developed more or I could have added more in. So if you're out there listening in our program or competing in sports, big thing is get more power in if you trying to look for improvements. And then for the general pop is I know I said earlier with plyometrics is conditioning.
Yeah.
This is where you can kind of get some volume in. Now, obviously, if you're working with a client or if you aren't don't have a trainer, you have to be very cautious and have some experience under your belt first with plyometric training. So you have to build up a volume. So you have to progressively overload yourself. You're not just jumping into these crazy methods of explosive repeats and you're doing this without any base aerobic capacity or base of plyometric. That's where a lot of people get hurt. And we see that a lot in these boot camp classes and stuff, which is I get it because I mean they're all great movements, but people just have to be careful. And with that, with explosive repeats, you're using very explosive dynamic
Yeah.
plyometric movements. You're gonna be training your type 2 fibers, but in a capacity where they're going to use more oxidative abilities. And then you can adjust the work from it could be anywhere from 8 to 20 seconds of work, rest 30 to 60, and then repeat a couple times. And then that trains rate of aerobic recovery, but on the power side.
And you're training yourself to perform at your
And on
best
that
in
one,
every rep, and that's
no, I
why
mean
quality
we
of
just
movement
designed a
matters so
program
much in power
with
because
this kind of aerobic
we're training for
plyometric
game day.
aspect of it, and
We're training
it's
for
not
that
high
moment that
reps.
you need to be able to
You're
jump
getting 8 to 10
out of that
reps
pocket
in
and get as much
resting and then
power as you
repeating
can
that
out of
over.
it.
So it's the ability to repeat those bouts of work, bouts of power over and over again. I'm not looking for max fatigue on these. Correct.
Right. And you're just trying to get something better at that movement over and over and over again. But, right, you're not doing like 20, 30 reps in one sitting. Well, that that wraps up today for power, and it's funny how I feel how little we touched on in just
No,
50
I mean,
minutes. I think just throwing it out there between you and me. Um, Actually, no,
yeah.
we'll wait because we're
Um,
doing the after the show notes. So, do you have anything you want to say to wrap up power?
say train hard, train explosive, and go be powerful every day. I mean, that's what we want. Don't leave this on the table,
You
especially if
like
you're an
want to say it
athlete.
probably so much. Come on, wrap us up with power here, Menchie. Yeah. If you want to be strong, if you want to feel healthy, if you want to have a strong, just a strong system in general, I'm talking on the cellular level of your body, strong metabolism, strong heart, strong cardiovascular system, train power, train explosively. You're going to get a lot more out of it. You're going to use your whole body under tension. You're going to demand energy to be produced and consumed. It's going to be much better for your system overall in terms of longevity, in terms of performance, in terms of the way you look, in terms of the way you feel, in terms of the way that your digestion works. So train power. You want power, train power. So yeah, that wraps up this week, and we'll catch you next week. But if you stay tuned, you'll hear kind of a little show note breakdown where Menchie and I just kind of chat about the episode. See you next week. I learned a lot that episode, but I still had my mind blown to where the point where I looked up two terms. Like, we were talking about some stuff, and I was like, I think he's talking about like oxidative and glycolytic power right now, but I don't want to like throw that out there and make everybody even more confused. So I looked them up a little bit and was reading about them for what it's worth. But honestly, it makes me think that like we could really dive in and talk about power in every sport, right? Right? We could do like we could pick your favorite sport, like probably hockey or football or hunting. And then one where we pick my favorite sport, like soccer. We can talk about like the power of every aspect in that sport, like the power of having to drive off of, and change direction or something like that, or driving off of first base.
Yeah, and it's very tough because every sport's like a little bit different.
Because you're so in depth, but I think you need a little bit more context, and that would help kind of put these terms in a way for people to learn too. And that's what would be great about it, because now we get to really explain power in a really specific context.
I mean, it's crazy because
now we get to explain how to train it in a specific context.
And I think when people think of power, they think
the most popular one,
these great tasks, but also look at someone like Usain Bolt, who's a great sprinter, and he produces so much force through every step. That's power in itself. So it's always working.
He was rated as the most forceful athlete of any sport. He creates the most amount of power with his steps.
And that's why
listening to it on
has
Peter
so many
Attia's
records and
podcast,
wins because
he
he's
said
producing
something
so
like
much force. He's
can
shifting from contraction to contraction,
smash through
and
cinder
he's not
blocks with
slowing
the
down.
amount of
He's
force
able
that
to
come
keep
down
that
into the
power
ground with
output
each one of his
sustained
steps.
over periods of time.
It's fucking nuts. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing too. Is like power is basically being able to be your peak performer with as little energy expenditure as possible, because you're creating so much force in such a short period of time that you didn't demand so much work to be done by your body. So you didn't use a lot of energy in that regard. So it's like an effortless production is what you're trying to get your body to be. It's being as efficient as possible, essentially. But then there was another one that, and this was just actually in a conversation. I don't know if this one's real or not. I should look it up, but we're almost over anyway. Someone was telling me that they calculated the force production of every exercise, of every lift. And the most amount of force that is being produced is highest in a clean. And it makes sense because if you're taking 300 pounds, you have to throw it onto your chest.
That's why
You're not only
lifting
lifting and generating
Olympic
force into
lifting
the ground as you
programs
lift
are
that weight, but then you're
sought
leveraging
after
yourself
in the
through
athletic
that
development
bar
world,
to
and
get
they're still
underneath
used
it.
to this
So it's
day
like a
of
double whammy of force
technique
production.
and throwing these movements in, because you're getting the optimal development of power. And I know some coaches, and there's some coaches out there that they won't use an explosive movement like the clean because it's risk for reward, injury versus not. Right. Which, and to be honest, it is tough to coach a movement if you're not comfortable with it. I tell people you really shouldn't be teaching a hang clean if you're not comfortable coaching it up or doing it yourself.
Because they don't know how to fucking coach it.
But
No, I'm
once you
kidding.
get it down and you're able to,
But no, it's very true. It's very true. But there's so many ways you can break it down and do it with a dowel and do it with a bar, and you can do it without someone being unsafe. But I think what I see a lot is I see a lot of athletes that come to me and they just have really shitty movement patterns or asymmetries, and all it is like a little soft tissue work or a quick activation drill or cueing, and they're good to go. And I just don't think in the athletic side of things in this field in this industry that people really care too much about taking a step back, take two forward. It's like they're just trying to take these guys who are already pretty good performers, top performers, and trying to push them a little
you
further.
really have
So it's like instead of
to take your
they just
time,
want to
and
load
that's
them
where
up and just see how much force they can
base
produce and see how much
the
power they
base
can
of
generate. People
programs
aren't really
of
worried
hypertrophy
about
and strength
fixing
come in
any
is
asymmetries in the body,
you
which
have
is
to have the
unfortunate because you'll
discipline
actually get
to
more power and be a stronger athlete
keep
if you can
all
fix any
position posture and
asymmetry.
really learn and want to be there to develop optimally. And that's where also I'm sure, I don't know if you have clients out there. Oh, people ask me, oh, I want to hang clean or I want to Olympic lift, and I kind of am like a little hesitant at first because it's a very progressive thing to teach. It's not going to be like, oh, hey, you're gonna all of a sudden just start hang cleaning right off the bat with a bar. It's like you said, it's a dowel, it's progression. I can't just throw 25-pound bumper plates on and have you clean. And I've seen it happen with clients, and I'm like, ooh, that's not good. Because they don't understand the mechanics or have the mobility or flexibility. Some people never have it, so they try to go up in weight and they'll be like, oh, hey, I'm getting stuck I can't hit 135. And I look at the clean, I'm saying, well, yeah, because you're just like muscling it up. You're not really producing force and power through full body. You're going to get stuck. You're not going to be able to just reverse curl that bar. And then it's if they don't want to take the time to learn the proper elbow position, everything else. Yeah. It but it is
Right.
hard to coach. And it takes a while for people to actually get the position
That's
and
a good
actual
point.
full
It is
movement
just like a
down.
reverse curl if you don't do it properly. Yeah, there was only like one or it was like one other trainer besides you who really Olympic lifted. I can't. Come on, holy shit! Why is his name drawing a blank right now? Colin. I knew it started with a C. Yeah, he and you, and then Chris came in. He would do it a little bit, but no one really did it. And then at this gym, everyone does it. So like I had to learn. And where I started was I just looked up Juggernaut. There's like a Juggernaut channel
Not off the top of my
for
head for
Olympic
Olympic
lifting. I don't know
lifting.
if you have any
Obviously,
other.
the NSCA is really
Um,
good. They have some good videos on it. But if
any
you're
other
if you're out there
publications
listening,
that
I
you
say you
recommend?
got to ask someone who's um, a trainer or a strength coach and is really comfortable training that. And there's different
Yeah,
aspects of Olympic training too. So if you when you watch Colin train, he would be like traditional Olympic training, snatches, full cleans, overhead, split jerks, all that stuff. I more use it for optimal power development through an athletics position wise. So I'm more hang cleans, power cleans, doing more stuff in catching in not a full squat position because of demands on what I need for a sport. Now, obviously, you can go to a full squat, but in the athlete realm, a lot of it's more out of a hang position, catching it in that athletic stance to be able to absorb that impact. So it's all
And
good. It's a little bit
yeah,
different.
that's so funny. Yeah, because yeah, that makes so much sense. Because my client who I hang clean with, he always catched in an athletic stance, and I never really said anything. But I was like, oh, you should probably drop below the bar a little bit
It's it's
more.
it's, it's
But now
different
it's
when
like,
you're
no,
coaching
actually, you
it
don't
for
need
an
to drop below
athlete
the bar
rather than
anymore. You're
who's
catching
someone
it
who's
just how
training
you
for
were meant to.
a
And
Olympic lifting competition. It's
yeah,
completely different
oh, it's pretty cool.
specificity.
Pretty.
So when people be like, "Oh, how come you're not catching the full?" You explain it, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know that." It's like, what demand I need.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, good man. This is a good podcast. I actually learned a little bit, and I hope you learned something or revisited something you hadn't looked at in a while.